everyone. I'm Heather from the Local History Librarian, and welcome today to our talk by Jane Vivekanand, who is the Treasurer of the Narre Warren and District Family History Group. And she is an has expertise in all areas of family history. I'll build her up really well. And she had a great talk 2 weeks ago on Irish records. We love that one. And today Jane will talk about immigration and shipping records. So you should see on your screen now the photograph of a ship. Can we all see that? Can anyone not see that? Anyway,
all good.
All good. That's what we want to hear. Okay. So now this is being recorded. This talk it'll be put up on our website under Library at Home. There's 3 other talks in this series that have already been put up, and this one will also be put up. So if you miss it today, if you want to revisit it, you can have another look at it. I did send you the notes that Jane kindly provided, and you should have had those today as well. So now I'll hand over to Jane.
Good morning. Nice and sunny. Sorry you're all inside instead of out weeding the garden. Now, we're going to talk about shipping and immigration, and most people know I'm quite talkative, so you will have to shut me up eventually. Now, why is my mouse not working? Technical hitch. Technical hitch. There we are. I always say start with a timeline. You've got to find the earliest date that you're working with, and then allow a few years either side for mistakes. So things like I found recently, someone I was researching, they got married in England, they were 19. A year later when they arrived in South Australia, they were mysteriously 18. So those sort of things make a difference when you're hunting. You also need to be aware of what the time frame of Australia's history is that you're looking in. Are you looking for free settlers? Are you looking during the gold rush? Are they bounty immigrants? Are they free settlers? That sort of thing makes a difference to your time frame. And another thing to look at is the actual route that the ships take, the speed that they take, how many passengers they take. It varied over time. So if you look at this 1820 voyage, which is the early years from when the first fleet sailed, they went down through Tenerife, Rio de Janeiro, down the bottom and took the trade winds across, versus once the Suez Canal opened, that made the whole trip a lot shorter and quicker. It was also the time frame when the ships were actually bigger. So 1869 was the Suez opened. It was also coincided with the start of the clipper ships, and the clipper ships were doing the voyage in 72 days in 1883, which was a big improvement on 109 days for the first fleet. And then as time goes on, the ships are also bigger, so they're carrying more passengers. So the very early days, the ships had 450 on them. By the time you get to the end of the period of immigration on ships, we're up to the 1960s, and they've got over 2,000 passengers on them. So that does make a difference as to how many people you're actually looking for when you're going through your passenger lists. And I'm going to go all the way up to post-World War II, because that's now 70 years ago, and some of us might be looking for people who arrived from Hungary or from Europe after the war. So I'm including those today as well. So the other thing is check details for other family members. They don't all arrive together. They don't all come out at the same time. They don't all come to the same location. Things like their nationality, their religion, if they're married, they're single, male or female, is relevant to the different time frames of Australia's development. And some people get confused with unassisted and assisted and bounty. An unassisted person is someone who basically paid their own fare. And one of the problems with that is in the early days, the ship's captains didn't have to record people who'd paid their own fare. So that's why you need TROVE, because you'll find people who travel in a cabin or in the saloon, they're going to get mentioned on TROVE, and then the rest of the passengers will be lumped as, 400 in steerage. The assisted people and the bounty people, they've got reasonably good paperwork because people had to track them. They had to get their money back, so to speak. So they're a bit easier to find. So this is what I call my still looking file. And this is just an example of my Pittard family that came out. There was a husband and wife and 12 kids. But so far I've only found 3 ships, and there's obviously 2 more. So I keep this file in my still looking file. I update it as I find things. The Drew family came out as unassisted. They came on 2 different ships over the space of a year. So they don't all come at the same time, but you can, narrow it down by keeping track of who gets here when. Other dates to consider is when you're looking for your convicts, don't forget the soldiers who came out with the convicts also can be traced on the ships. Quite a lot of the soldiers came out with wives and children, and a lot of them stayed. So that's another thing to keep in your back of your memory when you're looking. The first of the, I guess, charity groups that I came across is Lord Monteagle from Limerick. He sponsored over 800 mainly Catholics into Victoria over a 20-year period, but he also was very involved in arranging immigration from the UK to Australia. By 1841, you've got at least 1 ship a week arriving into Victoria, and 1848 was the first of the ships from Hamburg. Carolyn Chisholm Society started only a year later, and her organisation sponsored hundreds and hundreds of families to Australia. The gold rush created another big influx of people. 1858 to 64 was the Donegal Relief Fund, and they've got a website, and they've got these 9 ships. Each of those links lists you to the passenger list for that particular ship. Now, even though it says they arrived in Sydney, a lot of those people finished up in Victoria. But the good thing with this passenger list is a fabulous index. It's one of the best indexes I've come across, because it's not just telling you about the families, it's giving you their parents. So here we've got Patrick, his dad's Thomas is deceased, Bridget's the mum, and he's got a relative here in Sydney. So that's fabulous, but it's another page. When you scroll across, it's giving you even more information. It's telling me that Mother Bridget's actually living in Dungog. It's telling me down here, here's a young child who's come out and he's blind. This is a really good, if you've got one of these people, you've got a lot of information here straight away, apart from telling us their religion. If you go back here, it's giving you information on their native place. I find it interesting, even though they've come from Donegal, these people are actually from Scotland, from Edinburgh. So, and we've also got down here a little bit further, we've got Tipperary. So always look at something. Don't assume that Donegal Relief Fund doesn't mean you. It could. So you've got to keep an open mind as to where you're looking and what you're looking for. So going on. So then the last convict ship left England for West Australia. Then we have a number of more societies and more schemes to bring immigrants out. You've got the Women's Immigration Society, which literally was only bringing women out. The Closest Settlement Scheme, after Federation, the government decided they needed more families to come out. So that was bringing British families to Australia. The Big Brother scheme in 1924 was bringing young young men and teenagers out to get experience at farming. 1947 was when the Bonegilla camp opened up and took all our post-World War II immigrants through, and that didn't close till 1971, and there's a lot of information online for them. And the last migrant ship into Melbourne was 1977, which, you know, it's not really that long ago in time. After that, of course, everybody arrived by plane, unless we look at politics, and we won't go there. Now, there's lots of places to look. I've just made a list here for, you know, Victoria, but obviously a lot of these things also are relevant to each state. Your Public Records Office, your state libraries, museums, Victorian birth, deaths and marriage at sea. I actually prefer looking for birth deaths on the Digger Index at the library versus trying to use the system that's online at the moment. It doesn't seem to allow you to put in birth deaths at sea and not have a surname in there. So that's a bit annoying, but it doesn't matter. Then there's organisation like the Port Phillip District, which specifically is looking at that early time frame for Melbourne. And of course there's, you know, Greek Museum, Italian Museum. They've all got immigration and shipping information, and, you know, family history groups, etc. So this is just the Public Records Office for Victoria, because we're all in Victoria. As you'll see, if you're not familiar with it, this little logo here means that it's digitised, and these two down the bottom mean if you wanted to look at those things, you'd have to wait for TROVE to be open and order your records and go in and have a look. Now, one of the things with TROVE these days is, even though you can look at these passenger lists, they're actually an index and it's very basic. And now they're sending you off to look at further information. So the assisted passengers, that's actually connected to Ancestry. The unassisted passengers is now connected to Find My Past. Coastal passengers is Find My Past, and outward passengers is actually still here at TROVE. So why is it? So it's a very basic index that you find. The problem is that miss could be anyone. It's a random chance as to whether your family are going to be easily identified, which is another reason for using your time frame. In case you don't know, each one of these you can click on and it will sort, so it can put everything in date order. So if you've worked out the time frame, you might come up with 5 ships that you've then got to go and look at in more detail. So these are the other things that are at the Public Records Office specifically to do with shipping. These are all things that you would have to go in and order and look at. Things like Register of Deserters, you can get a lot of information for deserters in other places, but that's the main one for Victoria. We'll just have to wait for lockdown to finish and we'll get there. So this is the State Library of Victoria, and this is one way of getting around where we want ships deserters. This is the Victorian Government Gazettes, which are online at the State Library. It's telling me that this is the ship he's left, which is the Portland, gives where he's born, all sorts of information about the sailors. It's a way of circumnavigating the fact that you can't go to TROVE, and it is searchable. If you knew your seaman was Joseph Edwards, you can put it in and it will take you to the Gazette. So handy to try finding sailors. This is also from the Victorian Government Gazettes. It's 1838, and it's prisoners who've been given their conditional pardons in 1838. Now, this is the list of the ships as well, because a prisoner was known, a convict was known as him and his ship. The number at the back here, so Mr. William Balcombe, Guildford 6, that 6 means that was the 6th trip that that ship made. So where you see that number, there's Guildford coming out number 5. If there's no number there, that particular ship only ever made the one trip carrying convicts. But it's another way of narrowing down and finding people. This is the Port Phillip district. This is a really great website. It's got lots and lots of indexes, lots of things that are relevant to finding people. Coastal passengers to Port Phillip versus this one, passengers from South England to Ireland, which was really interesting. It's not got a lot of information in the index, but it does have full names a lot of the time. It is giving you the name of the ship and the year. So it's another way of narrowing down your particular person, especially if you've got, you know, a name like McKay. There would have been a lot of them come out. Working out which one is yours when they've only got Mr. and Mrs. isn't quite that easy. But it's another tick in the box for I've found them somewhere. So New South Wales have got their state archives, and the State Library, the Mitchell Library. I really like the Mitchell Library because they've got an extensive collection of diaries and journals and letters. Some are digitised, but most are not. Some are available for interlibrary loan, so you've just got to keep your fingers crossed that the diary you find is the one that's available, otherwise it'll be a trip to Sydney when they let us go. Now, state archives and records for New South Wales, apart from having lots of information for convicts, they've got the assisted immigrants to Sydney and Newcastle from 1844 to 1859. Moreton Bay, which is Brisbane, is 1848 to 1859. Port Phillip, which is us, is 1839 to 1851. General immigrants from 1839 to 1896, and Bounty Immigrants is 1824 to 1842, which is at Family Search. Unassisted passengers, 1842 to 1855. A lot of their records have been indexed by a company called Pastkeys, and you can find information from them. There's ships musters, there's vessels arriving. There's also the Colonial Secretary's Correspondence Index, has a lot of information in it. So this is just some of the things and what it looks like. The assisted immigrants, this one is actual scans. Some of them are a bit hard to read, but you know, you make the most. You can zoom in and learn to read the old-fashioned writing. Here's a assisted immigrants, which is telling me whether they came to Sydney and or Newcastle. It's not giving me that much information that I want for my family, but at least it's giving me the reference. If I go to Sydney, I can find the reel, the microfiche reel that it's on, and have a look at, try and find more information that way. This is an index and it's searchable, name searchable for the Colonial Secretary's Correspondence. So you just put your surname in, but here's one where, you know, he's on a list of prisoners on the Lady Nelson. So he's being sent from Sydney up to Newcastle. It's got lots of information in there, telling you also what fish you need to look at, what reel you need to look at. Further information. This one here, because it says per the Neptune, that is his original ship that he's arrived as a convict on. And another one here with the 1803. So it's a quick way, if you're not sure that your guy was a convict, try something like the Colonial Secretary's Correspondence. It's got a lot of information in there. It's also got a lot of information about the soldiers, the sailors, the free settlers that did come in the early years. There weren't that many of them, but they did come out. Bounty immigrants, you do find more information for them because there was a paper trail. The bounty immigrants were either paid for by the government, the state government, the Australian government. A lot of them were sponsored by churches, by philanthropists. As Australia settled, a lot of the squatters organised through agents for labourers to be brought out to Australia. The squatters had paid the original money to bring them out. When they got here, if they turned out to be acceptable and hadn't just lied about what they could or couldn't do, the government then reimbursed the squatter for the cost of bringing that person out. So these index cards are at the National Archives for bounty immigrants. They're very interesting because they do give you more detail than you would expect. The fact that you've got children down here, their ages, there's a chart, females too. So we've had the ladies come out. She's obviously been pregnant with twins and they've died at sea. So it tells you what date they died, that they were premature, and the name of the ship. It's giving you the father's name, that he's a Belfast weaver. This index card has got a lot on it, so worth having a look at, because 1838, they could have finished up in Victoria. They wouldn't necessarily have stayed in Sydney. So the other states, Queensland and West Australia and around the country, they've all got their backgrounds as well. Oh, I should go back to Sydney. Did I have it on my list? Sydney Living Museum, Hyde Park Barracks. That's great to go to for Irish female immigrants. They've got an excellent display there. They've got searchable website, very, very good. Parramatta Female Factories online as well. They've got a lot of information when you're looking for the Irish females. The National Maritime Museum is more background on shipping per se versus family history, but it's good to have the background of a ship. I'm going to sneeze, sorry. Sydney Welcome Wall is where people have put their names up with their family. It has a little bit of information, but it's nowhere near as good as Fremantle. I'll show you that in a minute. So going forward, Queensland. Now, Queensland State Archives have had a big flood. It was in 1893 and it destroyed a lot of their very early records, but there was a crossover back to New South Wales. So in the early days of Moreton Bay, look in the New South Wales records, you might find duplicates there. The immigration records that Queensland have got also includes a lot of immigration agents' records, land orders for immigrants and their passenger certificates. So if you've got people going to Queensland, terrific. There's also a thing called Q Album, which is photographs of Queensland, and it includes a section for shipping and ports and immigration, early settlers. So you might find photographs relevant to the lifestyle of your family that you're looking at. I've put Maryborough Historical Society there as a separate listing because Maryborough was at the time the second biggest port for Scottish and German arrivals into Queensland. Also quite a lot of Irish settlers went into Queensland through Maryborough. They basically in the early days came into Brisbane and then got a coastal vessel up to Maryborough. Once the Suez Canal opened and the ships came through around the top of Australia, they would stop at each port as they came down the coast. Maryborough was still an important area. And the Historical Society, the Family History Group and the library up there are all online and have a lot of information for the broad area around Maryborough. There's also state historical groups and societies. They've got museums and specialist museums as well. When you get to West Australia, Their state records has a lot of information there, tells you about what they've got, but there's not that much digitised. But if you go back to the National Archives, they've got inwards and outward passengers for Fremantle there. So I guess they're not duplicating it by the fact it's not at the West Australian state records. The West Australian Museum has their welcome wall down in Fremantle, and this one has also been done by people, you know, saying, here's my family, but it's got little thumbnails on the family and information about them, tells you what panel they're on, and again it's searchable, the name of the ship and the year they arrived. So that, I think they've done a better job with their welcome wall than Sydney has, because from a family history point of view, it's just got more information. State Library, this is a good one called Dead Reckoning, which amused me no end. So this is also a lot of information about immigration into West Australia. Albany, or Albany, whichever way you say it, was also an important port where a lot of people disembarked, so there's records for them. Facebook, this one popped up on our Facebook page the other day telling me, whoa, look, South Australian passenger lists 1845 to 1940 have now been digitised and are at the State Library. So that is another reason why you keep track of something like a family history group. They're constantly putting, well, Heather is too, constantly putting information on their Facebook pages. This one's only last week, I think it went up, because things are happening all the time. You know, I could tell you something's not there today, and in 48 hours it will be there. So you have to keep going back and looking at things, because it's not there one day doesn't mean it won't be there the next. This one is the Migration History Museum for South Australia, and because South Australia was fundamentally settled by free settlers, and a lot of German immigrants came through South Australia, there were convicts in South Australia, but they came from other states with people who they were assigned to, who decided to go and settle in South Australia. You can find the odd thing about convicts here, but it's more the families coming from overseas. It's still a very interesting site to have a look at. Tasmania's wonderful. Heather gave us a lovely, lovely lot of information. I'm not going to go over and over what she's already done, but their archives are really good, and it's because it was set up as a penal system, and there's a good paper trail to keep track of all those people, and at the same time they kept track of everybody else. So this is the Tasmanian Maritime Museum. I really like this site because it's got a lot of background and some excellent photographs and information. Things like the Launceston Immigration Aid Society, telling you that there was 5 ships between 1854 and 1862, and it was 850 immigrants. So it gives you a few clues of, okay, somewhere else to look, another phrase to put in. So if you're typing in Google, you could type in Launceston Immigration Aid Society and see how many hits you get, more than just this one. This advertisements, I like this. They wanted single women, tells you the name of the ship, that they're coming from Gravesend into Launceston and they're getting free passage. And down the bottom here, it's probably too small to read, but it's telling me that Agnes Sargent was a widow with her 4 daughters, sorry about the dog, and they came out to establish a school. The daughters got free passage, but Agnes had to pay full fare because she was too old. He was over the age of over the age of 30. This one's a really interesting one. Tells you about the type of servants. So this is people who are coming out as assistant immigrants. There could be bounty immigrants. I found it interesting that first-class farm servants, there were 17, and there were second-class farm servants. And I thought, I wonder what the difference is. Are these people who are really just labourers, whereas these people up here maybe have more skills? But it was interesting on this one ship, the variety of people that came out. Would you really expect, you know, to get a watchmaker and a locksmith? It has interesting information that's sort of relevant to when you're researching your family as to put them into context. This one is now the National Archives. Now, this was I was saying before about Fremantle. National Archives have immigration records for Fremantle, and giving you the ship, that where it's come from. So here we've got Fremantle going to Adelaide, or we've got Sydney going to Fremantle. We've got London coming to Australia, but this one has actually stopped in Fremantle on the way. So this is one way to sort of find someone where you think, hang on, they should be in Victoria, why are they not here? Because they possibly came via Fremantle on the way, or you've got someone in Victoria and they've disappeared. It shows how much our population was moving around. Some people were going across to West Australia after our gold rush finished, and they discovered gold in West Australia. So you've got this people going backwards and forwards. So shipping records are more than just immigrants. It's the movement around the country. It answers the problem why somebody disappears. You're happily researching away and all of a sudden they're no longer there. It's because they went for work, or they got married and they've shifted. This one is also from the National Archives. This is in citizenship. So in order to buy land, you had to become an Australian citizen. So this one here is for Johan Wanke, and down here in his application gives me the name of his ship and his application because he wants to become Australian. This one is after World War II. This is Hungarian immigrants coming into Australia. Here it's giving the date of birth of family members. This one's telling me the ship they came in on, and it's into Sydney, and their record's actually been digitised. So this is one of the cards from the card system, giving me information on this family, the holding camp that they were in at Bathurst. When they left Bathurst, they actually went to South Australia. So now that we're further away from that time period, this information could help somebody who's searching family history. This one I liked because it gave me the lady's photograph. This is a certificate of approval for an Irish citizen. She came out as a young woman and went to Townsville and was a nun. But it was lots more pages in the file at the National Archives for her arriving and going up to Townsville. And when I was tracing her, she only died in 1998. So you can find information that's in relative recent times. Now, the National Library, we all go to TROVE, but the National Library has Pandora. Now, you can link to Pandora from TROVE, but most people probably don't even get that far down because they're only looking at newspapers. Pandora is all the archived websites, and it has a lot of information there. This one is a government website where the Hungarian refugees are celebrating the fact they've been here for 50 years, and they're writing their stories. They're digitised, they're online. Some of them are even got photographs with them. So very interesting. And there's more than just the Hungarian refugees. There's also at the National Library the joint copying project. That is fabulous resource for immigration. Now, one of the things I found there is you have to read the fact sheet beforehand, the how-to, get your head around it. The best series for immigration is what they call the M series. It's got things like overseas settlement schemes, it's got diaries and letters. One of the things I found was all the family information, diaries and letters for Thomas Spring Rice. And Thomas Spring Rice was Lord Montague, and all his personal papers, correspondence, etc., is all held at the archives in the UK, but it's now been digitised and we can access it from the National Library. There's things like information from the Devon Records Office for family papers. That's where I found information for Phillip Gidley King's family, who I'm very distantly related to. There's research guides, there's fact sheets, there's e-resources, there's a huge amount of information there. If you look under the history subheading of family and genealogy, there's 283 results on the Pandora site, and there's also the First Families 2001 Federation project, which was where people were asked to do a little biography on their family, the first family to arrive, the ship they arrived on, and it does give you the link, not that you can click on the link, but it gives you the email address for the people who've put that up. So if that email address is still current, you can at least go and hunt for them. Now, specialist groups, we've got things like the ships list, which is a bit like Cindy's list, but it's all things shipping. Oz Ships, free surname search, which you sort of think, well, what's that got to do with immigration? A lot. Immigration Place, which is a project by the Monash University, has a lot of information there. If you were looking for the Wendish or Germans, the Wendish Heritage Group, they've got their website. New Zealand archives are relevant to Australia because Australians went backwards and forwards to New Zealand and vice versa. And the National Library of Scotland and various other places you can look relevant to as your research is moving along. So this is the ships list, and it's, as you can see here, there's a huge amount of information and subheadings. You can spend hours. This is a bit like TROVE for people who are into shipping, giving you information for diaries and journals. And I like the fact there's a link for the Illustrated London News, so you can find etchings of the ships, lots and lots of information. Things like scans of passenger lists. So this is the Nimrod, 1859, gives you your family, some information about them, you know, that she's a housekeeper, just valuable information. And I'd rather try and read somebody's handwriting than read an index, because you pick up extra things. So free name search has a category for Australian ship passengers lists, all sorts of things. Some of them might only be for a couple of years, some are for a long time frame, obviously quite a bit for convicts. It's fully searchable. This one here is a list of people who are travelling between Portland, Georgetown, which is Launceston, and Port Fairy and Adelaide. But it's been made out of two newspapers. It was created from, says she looking at her notes, because I can't remember the name, Portland Guardian and the Belfast Gazette. Now, the Belfast Gazette was Port Fairy, and that's not been digitised. It's not at TROVE. So you might, if you've got people that were maybe in Tasmania and were coming backwards and forwards, you could find them here. And a lot of people did travel. There was squatters who bought land in the Portland Western District area, bought their sheep over, bought the shepherd over, and then they went back to their nice home in Launceston because it was more established. But there was a lot of backwards and forwards between families and workers between Launceston and Portland in the early years, and then they've obviously then moved out to other places or stayed. This is the National Library of Scotland. They've got a big section there for immigration and passenger lists. A lot of their passenger lists, though, are into America and to Canada, not necessarily to Australia. But you never know, your people may have decided to go to Canada first, not been very happy with all the snow and said, let's go to Australia, it's warmer. So it's worth looking in those places. Don't sort of go, oh, they swam to Australia. I don't know how they got here. They could have come via America. It is a distinct possibility. Now, TROVE. TROVE is, you go to, don't go to it first. I say second port of call. Look at all the odds and sods first. When you can't find something, then try and find the answer in TROVE, particularly for people who came out as free settlers, because they're often travelling on ships that didn't have as many passengers. After the gold rush, there was they were called the wool fleet, and they were the clippers that came out with passengers and went back loaded with wool. But that's a time frame when people were paying their own way out. So they're more likely going to turn up in a newspaper list than anywhere else. Ship's captains and owners and crew and deserters randomly put in different combinations of names, words that you think might be relative to what you're looking at. As time goes by, lots of papers had reunions for ship arrivals. There's photographs and links to journals and diaries, and ship newspapers was interesting. Quite a few of the ships had a one-page handwritten newspaper that they handed out. And this is before the days of the big passenger liners. This is in the days of the clipper ships had newsletters. And some of them are there at TROVE with links. So when you're looking at arrivals and departures, shipping intelligence is used a lot in the newspapers. And also when you do your search, this comes under the heading of lists. So it's not going to come under article. When you're breaking down your TROVE categories, shipping intelligence and arrivals is under lists. So this one here is just telling me, as I said, it's got 8 passengers and it's going into Launceston. This one's got passengers, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson and 4 children. So and because it's a schooner and it's small and it's coming into Melbourne from Launceston, it does give you information. This is English shipping. This is passengers for Melbourne. This is the agent who's sent them out. It's from Glasgow. It's coming to Melbourne. The passenger that are consigned will be in steerage. Tells me who the saloon passengers are, who's in intermediate. It doesn't give me the number of people who are in steerage. But, not everybody came out in steerage. Quite a lot paid their way. But these people won't necessarily be on a passenger list because it wasn't required. When you're looking at death notices, you'll quite often find references to the ship. This is a young labourer. They think he's about 20 years old. He arrived in Geelong in 1849 and he arrived on the Laburnum. So you can find that sort of information. Here's another one where they've arrived in Victoria in 1856 with his father. Passengers on a ship, Sultan from Liverpool, gives you information, a really lovely little poem on Sailor Jack. He was also the owner of a sloop, the Good Intent, and he came from Oban in Scotland. So all that information there ticks boxes in hunting for where did they come from. This one is outward, and I find it a good one because apart from giving you the names of the passengers, it's telling you where they're going. So it gives King George Sound, this one to Ceylon, someone to Mauritius, someone to Calcutta, another one to Marseille, Southampton is the final place for the ship. Passengers in the cabin going to London. Mrs. Kerr, her family and servants, so lots of servants travelled. Their names are never going to come up on a passenger list because they're a servant. So unless you knew your servant worked for Mrs. Kerr, you know, that's a possibility. You could find them that way by looking for where the family disappears to. This is coastal ships. This is passengers travelling from Brisbane up to Cooktown. Gives you the surnames. Sometimes they'll say Ms. Carter, who the captain is. Information for people moving up and down the coast. Names of ships. Here's one who's got Noumea, Fiji and Samoa. People are starting to really move around. The mail ships, they also carried passengers. So if you think it stopped at a number of places and you've got someone who maybe came from India, look at the mail ships because quite often it'll tell you passengers' names. Then you have things like tracking a specific ship. This is the Montmorency, which did 3 voyages to Queensland carrying immigrants, predominantly Irish and Scottish immigrants. This is just giving a little overview, and it's a few years later. This is 1922, so it's giving you the names of some of the immigrants and where they are now. So if you know they've arrived, this is telling me that James lived in John Street and Thomas, his brother, is living down in Brisbane, and the other brother is now living in Ipswich. So it was still worth having a look at, even though it's well past the date of their arrival, because it's showing me how the 3 brothers moved. This one is an account of the passage out. It was celebrating again the arrival of the immigrants, telling us what it was like, what the winds were like, what the weather was like, that they sighted, the Cape in light weather. A steerage passenger, Patrick Leary, was lost overboard and they lowered the boat. So all this is relevant to your story of the family coming out. With TROVE, you can even get links to other pages, other websites, and here's etching of the Montmorency in sail. This one was bonus because apart from the bit that's not nice and easy to read, this is a story of the trip. This is the list of the passengers, and there's 2 photographs of 2 of the brothers that I'm hunting. Wow. And of course I could enlarge it up and I could keep it. So I mean, don't just look at the year that your ship arrived. Have a look and see if that ship had a reunion X number of years later. Mainly you'd find, for us it would be Geelong newspapers or the Portland newspaper. You're not necessarily going to get ship reunions in the Argus, but you might. Maryborough was a big port, so there's a lot of ship reunions there. Launceston you'd find, Fremantle you'd find. So you have to think laterally as to which port your crew came in on and then go hunting and seeing, because that was a bonus. I can't tell you, I did the happy dance in the kitchen when I found those 2 photos to see what they look like. Then you've got ships deserters. So here's Michael. He's a seaman. He's 25. He's got a dark complexion. There's a £3 reward for him. And they want anyone who's harbouring and fails to hand him in, they're going to get fined. So that's handy if your person's gone missing. And it tells me the ship's name is Ocean. Missing friends, it's another way of looking for them. Down here, where is you know, things like Mary is from Ireland is great, but it'll say per, here's one, Thomas Gash per Golden Era. So it's telling me that his family, either here in Australia or overseas, are looking for him, and they believe that's the ship he arrived on. And as you can see, it's in alphabetical order. And the missing friends were put in the newspapers regularly, just about every day of the week, or at least once a week. There would be a list of missing friends. Another one is mail to be collected. You'll quite often find a list of mail waiting, and it will tell you the person's name, if they're from Ireland or what ship they're on, as a cross-reference. It's another way of finding a ship's name. So who has what and where? Now, Family Search is free. It has lots of passenger lists. If you haven't been there, you have to create your password and join them for free, and then you can search their passenger lists. This is the Church of the Latter-day Saints. It's American-based, like most of the big organisations this day, but they do have a lot of information. They've got one of the Victorian passenger lists. They've got one of the New Zealand ones, because not everything is in the one place, which is a little annoying, but it's just the way the world works. Find My Past. Basically, it's United Kingdom coming to Australia. Ancestry is the opposite way around. It's Australians. The lists have been done here in Australia. That one's outward, that one's incoming. Now, Pastkeys, that's a company who create indexes from the New South Wales archives, and they sell them on CD. They've got one that's online, but a lot of those CDs have been purchased by family history groups, and they'll have them in their rooms, and you can look on their computers if you're looking for New South Wales people. So this Find My Past is transcription. Tells me that H.M. Rivet Karnak, at 47, married, settler. Now, there's great information. If I only looked at that, I'd be wrong, because when you look at the original, it says Mrs. and Scottish. So my Harry Morland is definitely not Scottish, because he was born in India. That's his wife. But when the transcription was done, they've made it male, and I could have got that really, really, really wrong. So if you've got the original there and a transcription, look at both of them. My Annie Pittard, when you look on the transcription, it's Annie Pittard and her details. When you look on the original, 5 of her children are listed by name. So don't just think, oh, look, there it is, it's nice and clear, it's all typed out, I can read it. No, if it's a document that's an original and it's scanned, even if it's faded, have a look at it, because you really, really need to. So that's that one. Now this is Pastkeys. Now I thought that this was really interesting. It's the only one they've got online, but it shows you what their formats are like. And who would have thought Scottish handloom weavers from Paisley? It's on the Beejapour into Sydney in 1853. It's through the colonial secretary's letters. It tells me the name of the person, their age, their occupation, their status, their arrival date. Well, it's all in one ship. But over here, there's all this extra information, who they were employed by, what their wages were. They were there for 6 months. These are people who are weavers, but they're now working as farmhands, as servants. This is fabulous little gold mine. If you wouldn't expect to find. I thought this was great. So when the world reopens and you can go to the Narre Family History Group, I know they've got some of Pastkeys CDs. It's something to go and have a look at if you're looking for New South Wales. It really doesn't help you for the rest of the country, other than the fact people in New South Wales do shift. They do go to Queensland and they do go to Victoria. So it is worth having a look at. Then you've got museums and heritage centres and government departments, they've all got websites, they've all got Facebook pages, they have links where you can go to other relevant areas. If you look at the port towns, they've got lots of information. Type in Geelong Port, type in Geelong Historical Society, Geelong Library, Geelong Museum. Put random words together. Remember that things changed names. The Launceston Pilot Station is one name, and it's now it's gone out of my head, the name that they had early days. What did I do with that? Doesn't matter. It had another name. Family history groups, there's special interest groups like the First Fleet Group. There's the Port Phillip Pioneers. Depending on the time frame you're looking at, there's lots of nationality specific groups. The Chinese now have a lot of their own information available. I like Family Search because it's free. I like Google because you can randomly just put a surname and a couple of words and see what comes up. Find My Past and Ancestry, you basically have to look at both, because what's here might be a transcription and the original's on Ancestry, and what's on Ancestry might be actually on Find My Past. So don't sort of give up. You have to broaden your thinking patterns. Think about what sort of work your ancestors might have done. Think about where they might have gone. When you make your timeline, it gives you that hole where you go, hang on, they've disappeared for a few years. Where are they? Well, if they're single men, have they gone to work in New Zealand? If they're in Tasmania and they're a single man and they're working on a big property, were they sent to Victoria? Keep thinking laterally to find the solution to the holes. There are many, passenger lists are fine, but there are lots of other ways of filling in the hole and working out. And some passenger lists you will never find, and some passengers you'll never find, because hundreds of people came out in steerage and they're just, the paperwork doesn't exist. It's gone. So keep hunting, keep looking. You will find it. They didn't swim, because unless they're going to swim the English Channel 35 times, there's no way they got here other than on a ship for our ancestors. And there is a huge amount of information out there. You can even look at things like, bizarre as it seems, Ellis Island immigration into America, which really basically only started being record keeping in the 1900s. There's a large number of Australians who've gone in and out of Ellis Island. So look, hunt.
Thank you, Jane. We might stop you. Thank you for the absolutely
You'd
wonderful,
have to stop me.
wonderful talk. It was just amazing. Now, 2 people want to know, including me. There's 3 people. The link that you gave us from the Portland to Belfast Launceston, where was that website?
That's surnames. That's the surname one. Where are we?
Is that on your list?
It is on the list.
Okay.
It's on the handout. That's
right.
Under freesurnamesearch.com.
Free, thank you.
and they've got an immigration section, and they've got that listing that they've got there is amazing, because it's people who 20 years ago, before the internet, sat there literally going through newspapers and creating indexes. Things like books. Now, I'll hold this one up. Can you see this one? This is a little old book. I've had it for ages. It's Birth, Deaths and Marriages for the Port Phillip Herald, 1840 to 1848, which Miss Elsie Graham spent, I can't imagine how long she spent, indexing and transcribing. But it's in alphabetical order, and it's birth, deaths and marriages, but in the death notices, died at sea on the ship St. George on the 16th of May, 1843. These books that are in historical societies, family history groups that were produced in the 80s have got information that's not digitised, because they've literally gone through the files that they've got. They've spoken to their people. They've looked at their newspapers. Pioneer books are a wealth of information, where they've interviewed somebody who's in their 80s and they've interviewed them in 1970 and put that story together. You can look at books like this one, which is Shipwrecks and Seafarers Scandals. This one gave me a lot of information about a bad part of my family. They were Pacific Island blackbirders. They were going to the Pacific Islands and snaffling these men and bringing them into Queensland and working them on the sugarcane fields. Now, it only mentions the name once, but it's about, probably a third of this book is about blackbirding and what the effect was and the rules and the regulations, and apart from the fact it's also got a bit about cannibalism, which I found interesting. But all these books, there's lots of books. Here's one, shipping arrivals and departures to Sydney. Now, okay, it's very boring, sort of dull information, but it's got an index. It's got a lot of information relevant to the ships. If you look at something like the Colonial, the Colonial Clippers, it's fundamentally information about the ship, but it's got a huge biographical section telling you other places to go and look. The appendix is in here. It's got examples of ships' newsletters.
Okay.
It's tells you about groups of ships, and this is just dealing with the clipper ships. A lot of background information to what it was like to be on those ships, what the conditions were like, which is all relevant to your story for your family. And I'll go and I'll shut up now.
Okay, so there's a question. There's a question. Cornish family from Gary. Cornish family went from Brazil to Teuton in Victoria between 1850 to 1858. No record among ships arriving in Adelaide, South Australia. Suggestions for likely route ship records.
Probably came to, they could have come through New Zealand.
All right.
Because they could have come round the Horn, depending on the time frame. Or they could have come the other direction and come in through Fremantle. So I'd have a look at Fremantle, and I'd have a look at New Zealand to Australian records.
Okay.
Because the ship, depending on the time of the year, would depend on which way the winds were blowing, if we're talking the sail age. So they've either come through Fremantle or they've come New Zealand. They would have had to island hop, so to speak, to get water and food, and then into Australia. But if they're coming through New Zealand, they possibly went to Sydney, Melbourne or Hobart, and then came, depending on which way the ship was going.
So essentially look everywhere.
No, look on. No, not really, because
because
if they're coming from Brazil, they're not going to come through Queensland.
Okay, cool.
Because the trade winds with the sailing ships, the trade winds is what influenced the route that they came on. So the very early ships came down into the southern trade winds because that was the quickest way. That's why they went Tenerife, Rio de Janeiro, and you'd think, why on earth did they go Tenerife? They went away from Australia, but they went down south to get into the wind to come across.
Okay.
It wasn't until they started having the steamships and the passenger ships that they came through on a regular basis through the Cape of Good at South Africa. And then once the Suez Canal opened, they then came through there because there was more places to stop and get food and water. And then they came around the top of Australia or around the bottom of Australia, depending on what time of the year it was.
Okay.
Did that answer that question?
Yeah. So if there's no other questions, Jane, that was absolutely wonderful. There's lots of feedback on our chat saying how wonderful it was, and it was indeed so interesting, so informative. You did such a great job. Thank you very much for being our guest speaker.
That's all right.
Yeah.
The trouble with shipping and immigration is there's just so much information out there. As I said to Tracy earlier, I had 80 slides to start with, and I went, oh, that's too many. I had to cut it back. There is a huge amount of information. It's because we get hung up on looking for a passenger list and finding their name on a passenger list. And you won't necessarily do it that way.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Next week, I'll be talking about Find My Past. So,
Yay!
Yay! So, yeah. So we've still got access to that from home for another few weeks. So Find My Past next week. And other than that, thank you very much for attending our session. Thanks, Jane, again. Absolutely amazing. And we'll hopefully see some of you next week.
That'd be great.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.